welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast. Our podcast features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to quality early learning and care, with a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. You're most welcome to this series where we're discussing and exploring aspects of STEM or STEAM, how we enable and support children to have fun and learn across the areas of science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. I'm really delighted that my guest for this episode is Professor Marilyn Fleer, who is a Professor of Early Childhood Education and Development at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. Marilyn, you're really welcome, and I really appreciate you taking the time at the end of your day, morning here, to chat to us in Early Childhood Ireland. You're really welcome.
Oh, thank you, Maura. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you and to all of the listeners on the podcast.
So, Marilyn, can you introduce yourself a little bit, your background and how you developed an interest in the area of STEAM and play, and how that can support young children's learning and development?
I think my whole passion for this area actually came from my early childhood, and in a kind of a funny kind of way, because when I began school, I never had the opportunity to go to preschool, but when I began school, I couldn't speak English. And so I found it really tough to learn to read. We didn't have books at home because I grew up in a fairly poor family. And so we didn't have a very rich environment in terms of those kinds of things. And so I think I naturally gravitated to the sort of the STEM or STEAM area because it's actually it's about wondering, it's about creativity, it's about imagining, it's about playing with ideas. And so it kind of just made me very excited to explore things. And I have this little story to share that I remember from when I was very young, of course, going out into the back shed and finding all these bottles and filling them with liquids and, pretending I was a scientist, obviously a chemical engineer in the making or something. But anyway, I was pretending I was a scientist and really just exploring with ideas, although they were stereotypical and they didn't lead to anything in particular, specifically like school learning, but they were all about wondering and being in awe of how the world worked. And for me, I think I've just carried that through to my life now as a person working in early childhood education in Australia. I just love all the opportunities to hear and see all the wonderful ideas that children can talk about, can think about, and can do, because I still think the world underestimates these beautiful young minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I love that idea of the time being so important, because it's sometimes one of the things is children not having enough time to explore and time to think. So, why do you think we need to be more conscious of the area of STEAM in kindergartens and schools?
I think that one of the wonderful things about STEM or STEAM is that it creates a way of thinking about the world, because all of those things, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the arts, they're human inventions. We created them historically for a human need to explain the world around us. And I think children are the same. They want to understand the world in which they live, and they look to other children, they look to adults, they look to the media, they look to all the things that they experience, and they want to try and understand what that is. And I think we as early childhood educators have a really important role to play, whether we're working with infants and toddlers, or whether we're working with 3 and 4-year-olds, or whether we're working with 5, 6 and 7-year-olds. We have a really important role in supporting that curiosity and wondering. And there's many ways you can do it, but for me it gives the children in our world a way to navigate and think about what they see. So STEM just gives us like different lenses on what we experience, and we want those children to have those lenses, because then they make choices and decisions that affect their health and hygiene. I certainly can understand more about what's going on in the COVID world, which, that's incredibly important. And we want children to feel that they have this agency to understand and explore with meaning and make the decisions that they think are important for themselves, but also as partners in a community, because children aren't on their own; they're with other children and they're with other adults. So having those lenses to navigate, the STEM lenses, is one particular way that we can gift children a way to interact with the world.
And, you said that there are many ways to provide that agency. I suppose as early childhood educators, we would feel play is one of the key ones. So, can you talk through how we do it in play, and, what the other ways are of providing that agency?
Oh, I'd love to share with you actually some thinking that I've had around this, because to me, it's kind of, there's a continuum, the way in which people think about play and STEM, so play and learning, shall we say. And there is a continuum when you look at the kind of models that are out there to help us as educators to create the playful environments that we want. And we often hear the word playful learning. And the continuum, as I see it, if we just take the example of science, there's science and play. We have spontaneous play. Then we have discovery learning, sort of playing with materials and discovering some science around it. Then we have what we're working on, a conceptual play world, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And then there are like process, sort of guided play, and where the adults are guiding the way the children might be thinking about certain things. And then there is of course, the whole idea of process skills, so the learning of particular science concepts. And then there is the more formal, shall I say, drill and kill worksheets, all of that sort of very formalised, decontextualised learning, where children are just expected to recite, things to do with the learning of facts, which has no connection. So for me, there is this kind of continuum, and the work that I've been doing actually sits right in the middle of it, because it sort of synthesises the two. It sort of recognises that play is the leading activity of the birth to 5, birth to 6. I actually think birth to 12 and beyond. It's just play looks different, and looks different for adults as well. But I think that the play is very important, and the work that we've done has been to try and find a way that we can support teachers to, particularly in the STEM area, a way that they can confidently celebrate children's play and agency, at the same time as thinking about what might be the concepts that are in the curriculum that we want to be teaching in STEM. And but the work that we do, it doesn't begin with the concept. It actually begins with the play, the imaginary play scenario. And so we have this model called conceptual play worlds, and it has 5 planning characteristics. And the first one is to choose a story that children love, such as the Rosie's Walk, which is a classic, beautiful story, lovely children's book, and so that book is really special because it has lots of drama in it, because as we know, the chicken is going around the farm, and there is this tension of the fox at any moment being able to catch the chicken, but the fox has problems along the way, which are quite humorous to children. And so choosing a story that can be like the imaginary world. So the first characteristic of our model is choosing a really dramatic, exciting book that children love, and that the adults who are reading it love as well. And the second characteristic is then to say, let's let's jump into the story. Let's create the imaginary world together. And that this imaginary world becomes the drama and the excitement. And in that excitement, the children can be the chicken, or they can be the fox, or they can be a cousin, or they can be a farmer, or they could decide to be a shed. So in that play, like with most child-initiated play, children choose characters that they like to be. But what's a little different is that we have the story that brings all of the children together, because we know some children struggle to enter play and or have communication challenges, and so therefore other children don't kind of understand what they're offering in the play, when they make a gesture or something. So when there's a joint collective imaginary world, such as Rosie's farm, then if somebody goes, "Bok, bok, 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 bok," then and they might not have the language to say, "I want to be the chicken," they all say, "Oh, you want to be the chicken." And so it's about this narrative supporting children, and then so the third characteristic is entering this imaginary world. So how do you enter the story? So jumping into the story can be as simple as deciding that outside, and we know that imaginary situations, and I'm very Vygotskian in my views. So my definition of play is that children create the imaginary situation. They see something and imagine something different, such as they see the outdoor play area and suddenly they imagine it to be Rosie's farm, and that the climbing frame might be the beehive, and so on, the different parts of the story. So they give objects meaning, and so that's very powerful abstract thinking and really important in play, as we know. And so entering the farm might be just putting a sign on the door that says Rosie's farm, and everyone goes out. And exiting, going back out of the farm, might be just closing the door and we're back in the room of our preschool or kindergarten. And then the next important characteristic is a problem arises. So in this example, because I actually did this in one morning as a pop-up play world when I was working with some teachers and in a preschool. And so we had been, I had read the story. They all knew the story, so they were telling me the story actually. And we'd all rushed out to go in Rosie's farm, and the children said, "You're going to be the queen bee, Marilyn." I said, "Okay." So I was the queen bee, and then a group of bees went, and together we were part of the story. And then there was another group of children who were being other characters in the story. So we kind of lived the story and the excitement. It was really amazing. As the teachers, and I was working with the teachers there, so they were also being characters. So one of them was helping be one of the foxes, because there were many foxes in this story, the children decided. And so then when we came back in, and this is kind of not so much like role play, it's more that they were jumping into the story and living the imaginary play that they had, living it through imaginary play, the story that they loved and we had looked at just previously. When we came back, I had on my mobile phone, I'd of course pre-recorded a little message, and I said to the children, because this was in a farming community, so I knew that they knew lots about foxes and chickens, and so knowing the children was important, and so I said, "Oh, while we were outside on Rosie's farm, there was a message that was left for me on the phone," and so I said, "Wonder what it is." And so the children were all really interested, because we were all together still, because we just had this lovely experience. And so we listened to it, and of course it was, "Bok, bok, 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 bok. Oh, it's Rosie's cousin here, and I want to visit Rosie, but I can't find Rosie. I can't find the farm. I need some help." And so I said, "Oh, what are we going to do?" And so the children then decided, well, we need maps. We need to be able to support Rosie's cousin. So this is an example of a problem that arises in the play. And then the children started making maps, and then they, took the maps, and somebody decided they wanted to be Rosie's cousin, and then they were explaining how to get to Rosie's farm, and used all the beautiful prepositional language, under, over, around, etc. That's in the book, and showing that in their own drawings, which were their maps, of course. So this was all about documenting their imaginary situation in a way that was meaningful to them. But we also, as part of that, we also we said, we could go onto Google Earth and see. So in other words, there were lots of things that could stem from that then continued on, but for the rest of the day, because we then, experienced this beautiful play world. But that fourth characteristic is all about planning a play problem that is kind of like a provocation for the children, but it's not. But it's an authentic problem. It's something that as knowing the children, I knew they'd be interested in. And of course, I dramatised it even more because we listened to fox sounds on my phone, and we talked about, I think the fox is getting close. So, and then the children were, one of the children took the phone and off they went, taking photos of the tracks that they'd made, and so on and so forth. So this is an example of what a conceptual play world can look like. And in that, of course, in this example, we can say so beautifully that with these characteristics of a play world, and this one being a pop-up play world, just happening instead of group time reading the story and then the children choosing activities, on this particular day, this is what we did. So it's not to say you do it all the time. It's just to say this is so much more interesting than having a boring drill and kill experiment that makes no connection to children's lives in, say, science, or, creating some sort of engineering challenge, but still is disconnected from their lives. So here, these children are on a farm, farming community. This was really relevant. They knew the story. It was really exciting to them. And the children had lots of agency in this because, they decided lots of things, but we, the teachers and I, as educators, also knew that this book had beautiful, rich language in it, prepositional language that could support mathematics, that the planning was really nice because the children had to think through. This is very, very much design and engineering, and that the children's drawings, how they drew their representations from a front view or a plan view, created challenges as well. So how do you explain to go around the pond by drawing it, and so on. So again, what happens in that is that new problems arise because the children are interested and they want to take it further. And educators, we know what the curriculum is, we know where we want to take them, but we can work. We work with what the children bring to it, but also looking really closely at how they're reasoning and thinking about things in that imaginary play scenario. And of course, then I had props and things too that I used for this, because I read the story, but I also told the story, and the children recreated it. So I just left the props in the environment. So then the props became the tools for the children to use as they wished, but also they had the signs. So if they decided they wanted to go back into the imaginary play world of Rosie's farm, they could just put the sign on the door and invite their friends in. And all of that first part, took 20 minutes to 30 minutes of telling the story, entering the imaginary play, jumping in, being the characters, coming back, having the provocation, the problem arising, and then trying to solve it. And it was so exciting. The room was alive. Children were buzzing with excitement, and I got many phone calls from the teachers over the next couple of weeks saying, we had to go back into our imaginary play world many times. And the children said, I want to go and visit Rosie's farm. And so it just gives an example of what that looks like. But you can have really much longer planned, more complex planned play worlds as well. So choosing other kinds of books, like with chapters, and you can easily expand that so that you read one chapter and the chapter of a book creates that imaginary play world. But my experience has been that with all the teachers that have tried it out, the longer stories, particularly if they're very, like with Charlotte's Web, it's a beautiful story. It's filled with a lot of emotions and drama, and that's really important because that's so important to children's play, to live those experiences and be Wilbur, be Charlotte the spider, or Wilbur the pig, and want to save Wilbur. And so you might only ever read one chapter to set the scene, because then the children fly with it. And and in experiencing that, the children will make suggestions about where to next as well. And if the play is starting to lose some of its magic, because the children are taking it or have lost interest in it, then you can either stop or you can reintroduce. A letter arrives from the rat. I'm just trying to think of the rat's name now in the story, and the rat might say, "I'm really hungry, and I understand that Wilbur might be able to help me. Can you help me? Can you help me find Wilbur? I don't know where Wilbur lives." So I'm just using as an example, and then the children can make decisions about how they want to go forward in that kind of environment. But all of the time, the planning is planning for the authentic problem that can arise, knowing the children, knowing the curriculum, and really importantly, monitoring, not monitoring, that's the wrong word. It's really being with the children. And that's what we've learned in our research, is that a conceptual play world brings the teacher into the children's imaginary situation in such a beautiful way. And the children actually are really happy for the adult to be involved in this play, because it is a collective play, and it's not like their child-initiated play that they would be doing at other times. It's, instead of the story and the activity, it's actually about bringing this STEM experience to life through the drama and through the play. And as a pop-up, it can happen just on that day instead of how you would have normally planned, or you might decide to run with a more complex story and keep visiting that and with new problems based on observing how the children are going.
And I suppose the more complex story is kind of with older children, that the Rosie's Walk kind of pop-up is more suited for younger children, yeah?
Absolutely. And of course, yes, that's why I mentioned it. But also, if we're thinking about infants and toddlers too, in an imaginary play world as well, we often get asked, well, how do you do this with I work with infants and toddlers. So how could you create a STEM play world for them? And one of the projects that we did was all around the story. It's an Australian story of a possum. It's a naughty possum who goes into the house, because possums are nocturnal, and goes into the house and messes up every room. And what we did was we, with the infants and toddlers, we created a big book of this story, but instead of using the pictures in it, we used we photographed the children's environment in the childcare centre. So we had the kitchen, we had the area where the mums sit and the dads sit with the children to settle them, when they come in, and, all the different spaces everywhere in the centre, where the arts area was, and so on. And so took photographs of all of those different areas, and they became the pages of the book. And then we had the puppets, of course, that went with it. So, but what was really beautiful, what we really learned was that when the teachers introduced the book and they went through the story, and the naughty possum was in the kitchen banging pots and pans. The children banged the pots and pans because there happened to be pots and pans with the storytelling, of course. And so the children were living this experience of the story through these artifacts and making the noises, and then wanting to put the possum to bed, and all of the things that we know infants and toddlers are very passionate about. And so what was beautiful about this was that the infants and toddlers, even without lots of language, they could signal to the educators that they wanted to go and play in the play world, because they would go and get the book and they would give it to the educator, or they'd go and get the different artifacts and they'd give them to each other to sort of signal that they wanted to play together. And it was so beautiful. And we thought, we so underestimate what these beautiful human beings can do at such an early age. Here they are initiating collective play. We don't think of infants doing that, but they were initiating collective play with the educator. But the educator had, of course, told the story a few times over the week. And so the children and the children would rush. She didn't say all babies have to be sitting on the mat. Of course, that's not how it happens, as we know. She would just start reading the story, and they'd all rush over and they'd be on her lap, and they'd start to pretend they were the possum. And then she introduced some possum tails, because they all wanted to wear possum tails. So we had lots of possums. And so the children, and then there were all these beautiful things that they did that just extended the play every day. But it was lovely because the conceptual play world, the imaginary situation, really brought to life the STEM, because she got the iPad out and they listened to real possums and watched possums, not real possums, they were real possums on the iPad, but they were listening to the sounds and they were looking at what they were eating and so on. And they went out, because the reason why the educators chose this book with us was because they had lots of possums in the environment, and so there was lots of possum droppings everywhere. So the children went looking for those as well, and so for infants and toddlers to then they're looking at their world through the STEM lens now. This is and they're doing it in a way that's so meaningful to them, because this is what's in their environment, and they don't know what makes all these droppings, but now they do, and they know more about possums and about the world in which they live through this. But also it opened up beautiful conversations with the families, because most of the families had possums in their roofs. So there was these lovely conversations about that going on at home as well. So it provided this really rich context for play and learning in such a way that begins with the children, begins with the children where they're at, but it also introduces this lovely play problem that they can take forward.
So we'll break here for part one. Marilyn's examples have given us so much to think about and reflect on. And please do check out part two of this podcast episode, which will be published in a week or so. Thank you for listening, and talk to you soon.